The Florida swamp, the land of the alligator and the mud, has always been a place of danger. But what if we told you that in its swamps were hidden the most incredible images of freedom in the history of the United States? Today we dive into the Everglades to unearth the secrets of the Maroons and the Black Seminoles, communities that built sanctuaries of autonomy right under the noses of empires. This is not just history, it is epic survival. Prepare to see how an alliance forged in the mud challenged slavery and rewrote the meaning of resilience. The landscape of Florida is defined by the sun, the sand, and above all, the water. But beyond the tourist beaches and the skyscrapers of Miami, there is an aquatic world, a green and gray labyrinth known as the Everglades and its surrounding swamps. This is an inhospitable domain, dominated by the alligator, the mosquito, and the dense undergrowth of cypress and mangroves. For centuries, the mental image held of these swamps was simple: an impassable wasteland, a place where only the desperate or natives could survive, and where any trace of civilization was swallowed by the mud and humidity. However, in the depths of this muddy immensity, archaeologists and historians have begun to reconstruct a set of historical images that no one believed possible. These are not bright photographs or colorful murals, but silent revelations of pottery, stone tools, and remnants of campfires hidden under the swamp canopy. They are the traces of communities that chose, or were forced to choose, freedom in the deadliest place in North America. This essay delves into the history and archaeology of the Florida swamps to reveal the testimony of the Maroons and free African Americans who, in alliance with native peoples, managed to build bastions of autonomy that defied two nations and rewrote the true meaning of human resilience. To understand the audacity of these settlements, one must first understand the nature of the Florida swamp. The term Everglades, or river of grass, refers to a vast wetland ecosystem that flows slowly from the center of Florida towards the bay. It is a place of brutal contrasts. On one hand, it offers incredible biological richness: fish, game, edible plants. On the other hand, it is an implacable enemy of sedentary life. Seasonal flooding, oppressive heat, and the omnipresence of insect vectors of diseases made it the perfect guardian. From the perspective of slave hunters and military forces, the swamps were simply too costly to penetrate. The terrain forced travel on foot, canoes got stuck in the shallows, and navigation was almost impossible due to the lack of permanent landmarks. This difficulty of access was the first and most crucial layer of protection for the fugitives. The impossible images we seek are those of stable communities in this unstable environment. They were not just wandering individuals surviving day to day, but well-organized settlements known as cimarrones, Maroons. This term, derived from the Spanish cimarron, was used to describe slaves who had escaped and lived in inaccessible places. In Florida, these Maroons learned to move and live according to the rules of water and mud, achieving a symbiosis with the environment that made them essentially invisible to the outside world. For the slaveholders, it was an unbearable irony. The land no one wanted had become the only place where thousands of people could be truly free. This history of freedom in the Florida swamp is intrinsically linked to the history of native resistance. Unlike other regions of the southern United States, where alliances between fugitive slaves and indigenous peoples were rare or temporary, in Florida, an unprecedented cooperation flourished, giving rise to the identity of the Black Seminoles. When Africans escaped from plantations in Georgia or the Carolinas, their destination was often Spanish Florida, where the authorities, in an act of geopolitical pragmatism, offered them freedom if they converted to Catholicism and served in the militia to defend the border. However, as American influence grew and Florida changed hands, many Maroons moved into Seminole territory. The alliance they forged with the Seminole peoples was unique. The Maroons were not simply slaves of the Seminoles. They were, in many cases, autonomous allies who lived in their own villages, known as doti or arguelles, paying an annual tribute in harvests or livestock. They shared land, military knowledge, and, crucially, the experience to thrive in the swamp ecosystem. The Seminoles provided the expertise to negotiate the risks of the interior, while the Maroons often offered knowledge of Anglo-American culture and the ability to cultivate crops that were not traditional for the natives. This cooperation generated a radical socio-political image, a multi-ethnic and self-sufficient coalition that represented a direct threat to the Southern plantation model. The existence of these free communities on the frontier not only offered an escape route, but was living proof that slavery was not the natural or inevitable condition of the African American. This was one of the main reasons why the United States invested an enormous amount of resources in the Seminole Wars, which were, to a large extent, wars to recover slave property, a military investment that far exceeded the war against any other Native American tribe. We have seen how archaeology is rewriting history in the mud. If the cunning of the Maroons in outsmarting slave hunters is impressing you, take a break. Did you know the history of the Black Seminoles and their role in the Seminole Wars? If you want us to delve deeper into that incredible military and cultural alliance, leave us a comment with the word allies. And if you love hidden history, subscribe now so you don't miss the next historical expeditions on this channel. The difficulty of proving the existence of these free communities was, paradoxically, proof of their success. If a settlement had been easy to find, it would have been destroyed. The Maroons and the Black Seminoles were masters of invisibility. Their images in the swamp were designed to disappear. They built structures with perishable materials, branches, palm leaves, mud, that the relentless Florida climate quickly consumed. They buried their tools or hid them in branches, and their camps were often temporary. For modern archaeologists, this presents a monumental challenge. They do not look for large stone cities, but for small evidence that confirms daily life. A handful of pottery fragments, the distribution pattern of campfire stones, or remnants of posts that confirm a structure. Research in places like the Great Dismal Swamp on the Virginia and North Carolina border has established the precedent for searching for these minimal traces, and the same methodology has been adapted to the Florida swamps. The key to discovery in Florida lies in the identification of the hammocks, small dry islands within the wetland. These mounds of earth are the only places high and stable enough to allow permanent or semi-permanent settlements. By systematically excavating these hammocks, research teams have managed to unearth material remains that tell a story of resistance. These findings are especially astonishing because they contradict the predominant narrative of American history that tends to view fugitive slaves only as victims seeking escape, not as active agents founding independent societies. Every pottery fragment is a confirmation of a home, every wild animal bone is proof of self-sufficiency, and every fragment of metal from a broken musket is a testimony of self-defense. The images that the Florida swamps have begun to reveal are a powerful contrast to the world of plantations. One of them is the image of self-sufficiency. The findings suggest a surprisingly varied diet, which included hunting alligators, turtles, and birds, as well as gathering plants. Added to this was subsistence farming. The cultivation of corn, rice, and other vegetables not only fed the community, but served as the tribute they paid to their Seminole allies. This image of a people successfully cultivating and hunting in an impossible environment dismantles the narrative that Africans were dependent on slave civilization. Another revelation is the image of cultural adoption. Excavations often reveal a mixture of artifacts, pottery made in the traditional African or African-American style, sometimes mixed with Native Seminole pottery, and occasionally fragments of imported earthenware that could have been taken from raids on plantations. This mixture of objects represents an image of cultural syncretism, where necessity and alliance forged unique new traditions and ways of life, which were neither totally African nor totally native but maroon. But perhaps the most powerful image is the image of the flaw in the system, freedom forged without the recognition of any government. In the American colonies, freedom for African descendants generally required a legal document, a social contract, or the recognition of a state. In the Florida swamps, freedom was not guaranteed by any paper. It was guaranteed by geography, knowledge of the terrain, and the will to fight. It was an anarchic, brutally won freedom, which existed as a thorn stuck in the heart of the slave expansion of the United States. This network of maroon settlements was an alarm system, an escape route, a precursor to the Underground Railroad, and a center of military resistance that lasted decades. It was, in fact, the point of support for the Seminole resistance. American troops discovered that defeating the Seminole tribes was impossible, as long as the maroon communities continued to provide food, shelter, and scouts who knew every corner of the wetlands. Ultimately, the images that no one believed possible in the Florida swamps are not just archaeological finds, they are a rewriting of American history. The swamps, traditionally seen as a symbol of danger and desolation, are transformed in the light of this research into sanctuaries of freedom, strongholds of a silenced resistance. The astonishment generated by this archaeology does not come from the size of the ruins, but from the enormous significance contained in the smallest artifacts. Every fragment is a reminder of the unbreakable pursuit of autonomy, These Maroon communities achieved the unthinkable, living and thriving in the harshest environment in the region, without falling into servitude during a period when slavery was the law of the land. Thanks to the work of historians and archaeologists who dare to immerse themselves in the mud and fight the mosquitoes. Today we can see these images clearly, that of a campfire lit on an isolated hammock, that of a dark-skinned farmer working the land amidst the alligators, and that of Black Seminole and Native warriors jointly defending a territory that was their only guarantee of freedom. The Florida swamps not only preserved the remains of these lives, but also the testimony of a forgotten chapter of human history, where desperation met strategy and freedom flourished against all odds. In the land of mud and undergrowth, the true astonishment is not in the alligators, but in the audacity of those who chose freedom. These small fragments of pottery and tools in the mud prove that, against all odds, freedom can flourish where no one seeks it. What part of the Maroons' history impacted you the most? Tell us in the comments. And if this deep dive into history fascinated you, please give it a like, share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can continue discovering the forgotten stories of humanity. See you next time, explorers.